Just yesterday, the Trump administration announced a historic indictment against the country's former president, Raúl Castro, the 94-year-old charged over his alleged role in a deadly attack on two civilian planes back in 1996. Meantime, a U.S. aircraft carrier has arrived in the Caribbean. Earlier, when asked if this was meant as a warning to Cuba, the president said not at all. Joining us now to discuss is Republican Congresswoman of Florida, Maria Elvira Salazar. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. So the indictment of Castro comes as the Nimitz carrier strike group. I mean, that's what the president said.
I know, but you know, it's hilarious what's really happening here, because why would you be sending one of the biggest aircraft carriers in the world to the Caribbean if you're not sending a very big, loud signal to the Castro family? Boris, and I'm sorry I interrupted you. I was just laughing because I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, the president said it wasn't meant to send a message at all. This carrier had been, the strike group had been sort of off the coast of Brazil doing exercises. Now it's moved to Cuba. There are questions about whether this is the setup for an effort to forcibly remove Raúl Castro from the island. Is that a move that you would support?
Oh, of course. Well, I believe that that anything could happen when it comes to Cuba, and it's not a similar case as in Venezuela, because we got to take into consideration that Raúl Castro is 95 years old. And I do believe that when you're 95, your kids and your grandchildren are the ones who are making decisions for you, health-wise, and we're talking about biology. So I do think that the younger Castros need to be thinking really loud and clear what is it that they're going to do with their father and themselves. Look what happened with Maduro and his wife. They're both in jail. So we're talking about that the Castro family, there are only 3 or 4 members who are really calling the shots. And I love what the administration is doing, because for the average American who's watching your program, Boris, this is a national security issue. The Castros have done such a dismal job. They have been in the business of power for 65 years. That population, we're talking about 11 million slaves on the island of Cuba. At any time, they can go and jump into the sea and try to get to Miami, the district that I represent in Congress. And this is exactly what the president is trying to prevent, another humanitarian crisis. So Cuba right now is a national security threat. That is why Marco Rubio is giving them $100 million in humanitarian aid. The problem, and this is also very important for the audience that is watching, is that many years before, we, the United States, we have offered humanitarian aid to the Cubans when there has been a hurricane or any natural disasters. And they have always said no, because in those cans or in that humanitarian aid, we have the American flag, or it says this is coming from the United States of America. And the Cuban regime doesn't want that. They want those products, like Secretary of State just said, and put them in their own stores, sell them to the population that's starving. And but all that is coming to an end thanks to President Trump.
So, Congressman, just so that we're clear on your position, you would support a military action to forcibly remove Castro from the island?
I would like to see something like we saw in Venezuela, something quick in and out, and if they don't leave on their own volition. I think that could be the case. I do believe that we are ready. The United States military is ready. We have different contingency plans that obviously I don't know about, but we know how the Castros proceed. And I just told you, this is an island that has no electricity, no oil, no food, no medicine, no clothes. They don't have anything, because now Russia, they cannot be pimping the Russians anymore. Now the Venezuelans are out of the game. Mexico has decided not to send any more humanitarian. And the Castro regime, who are in the business of power, they have nothing else to do. So it's a different scenario, and I'm sure this is going to unfold very quickly to the benefit of the United States.
I wonder, Congressman, as you describe the situation for a lot of Cubans the vast majority of Cubans on the island without ready access to fuel or energy or food, if there is a military act by the United States, the regime is fairly isolated and insulated from the hardships that the Cuban people face, and you have President Miguel Diaz-Canel saying there's going to be a bloodbath. Are you concerned about potential collateral damage, about unnecessary loss of life if there is to be a U.S. action in Cuba that sees the country destabilized and, as you said, a wave of migration to the U.S. like never before seen?
Well, the only way for that scenario to play out would have to be if the Cuban military is ready to fight. And they're not. Those people are also starving, and their families and their neighbors and their cousins. So I want to stress, and I'm sure that you can explain it to your audience, that this is a completely different scenario. The Cubans and the Cuban regime, they have very little resources. And they announced the other day that their reserves of oil were down to zero. So what type of military? The only thing that we could definitely, and I'm sure the Pentagon is thinking about this, is that they announced a few weeks ago that they had bought 300 drones. I mean, how can these people be buying drones if they don't even have food to give to their population? But I don't think the Castros are that stupid that they will use those resources in order to provoke the United States, and then they will know that their end is very close, and it will have a very bad result and a very bad ending.
Lastly,
I believe that, and I pray to the Lord that that Castros will read the memo.
Lastly, Congressman, in response to U.S. pressure, Russia says that it is ready to provide Cuba with active support. Back in March, President Trump allowed a Russian tanker to dispatch an oil shipment to the island. That has since run out, but there is another Russian tanker that was sent to the island in April that is in a holding pattern in the Atlantic. What's your response to the Kremlin? Do you think that President Trump should let that tanker dock as well in Cuba?
I don't think so. I think this is the beginning of the end. This is the end of the end. We allowed one tanker to go through, and that lasted 7 to 10 days. Do you really think that Vladimir Putin is going to risk his relationship with the White House, having Ukraine and having many other issues pending because of the island of Cuba, that he knows himself that the Cubans owe the Russians $120 billion in monies that that the Cubans borrowed and never paid back to the Russians? I think that this is a game where Vladimir Putin understands very well that fighting for Cuba is just not a good business vis-a-vis the United States. That's why Cuba is completely isolated, and this is the time for us, the United States, to help the Cubans become our #1 friend in the Caribbean for the next 1,000 years, because that's what the Cubans want.
Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you, Boris.
Of course.